The storm had swept in quicker than I expected. When I parked my car at the base of Blackwood Hill, the air was cold but still. An hour later, as I trudged deeper into the dense woods, the heavens had opened up, drenching everything in sight. My flashlight cut through the gloom like a thin blade, but it did little to settle the growing unease in my chest. I wasn't supposed to be here, not really. Not at this hour, not under these conditions. It had all started with a stupid dare at the office. "Spend a night in Blackwood Hill," they'd said, laughter filling the break room. The legend was a local favorite, the Blackwood Butcher. A man said to have murdered over a dozen people in these woods decades ago. Some claimed he'd never been caught, that he still roamed the forest, watching, waiting. I didn't believe in ghost stories or urban legends, but I'd laughed along and taken the dare. It'd be easy, I thought. A night in the woods with a tent and some snacks. I'd snap a selfie in the morning, show them how ridiculous their stories were, and collect my bragging rights. But now, standing alone in the pouring rain, the stories didn't feel so ridiculous anymore. The first hour had been uneventful. I'd set up my tent near a clearing and built a small fire. I'd even chuckled at my own foolishness, imagining the faces of my coworkers when I recounted the uneventful night. Then the rain had started, forcing me to abandon the fire and retreat into my tent. The patter of rain on the fabric was soothing at first, but as the hours stretched on, it became maddening. Couldn't sleep. Every rustle, every distant crack of a branch had my heart racing. By midnight, I'd had enough. Lying there in the dark, listening to the storm and my own erratic breathing, was unbearable. I decided to take a walk, clear my head. With my flashlight in hand, I ventured out, the beam dancing over the slick, glistening trees. That's when I first saw it, or thought I did. A shape, a shadow, darting between the trees. I froze, the flashlight trembling in my grip. "Hello," I called out, my voice barely audible over the rain. No response, just the relentless drumming of the rain and the wind whispering through the trees. I convinced myself it was nothing, a trick of the light, maybe an animal startled by my presence. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I pressed on, deciding to follow a narrow trail I'd noticed earlier. The path wound deeper into the woods, the trees growing denser, their branches intertwining above me like skeletal fingers. The flashlight's beam caught movement again, but this time I was certain it wasn't my imagination. A figure, tall and broad, just at the edge of the light. It vanished as quickly as it appeared. Panic set in. I'd read enough horror stories to know this wasn't good. My logical mind tried to rationalize it. Maybe another camper, someone else caught in the storm. But deep down, I knew better. The figure had moved too deliberately, too silently. I turned back, deciding it was time to return to my tent, but the path looked different now. The rain had turned the ground to mud, erasing any footprints I might have left. The trees all looked the same, and in my growing panic, I realized I was lost. I quickened my pace, hoping to stumble upon something familiar, but the woods seemed endless. My flashlight began to flicker, the beam growing weaker with each passing minute. I cursed under my breath, tapping it in a futile attempt to restore its strength. That's when I heard it, footsteps, heavy and deliberate, somewhere behind me. I whipped around, the flashlight barely illuminating the path behind me. "Who's there?" I shouted, my voice cracking. No answer. The footsteps stopped, but the silence was more unnerving than the sound. I turned and started walking faster, almost running, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The footsteps resumed, matching my pace. Whoever it was, they were following me. Desperation took over. I left the path, crashing through the undergrowth, branches clawing at my clothes and skin. The footsteps followed, always keeping their distance but never fading completely. My flashlight finally gave out, plunging me into darkness. Blindly, I stumbled through the woods, my only guide the occasional flash of lightning. Then I saw it. A cabin, barely visible through the trees, its windows glowing with a faint, inviting light. Relief washed over me. Civilization. Safety. I sprinted toward it, ignoring the pain as I tripped and fell over roots and rocks. Reaching the door, I pounded on it with all my strength. "Help! Please, let me in." The door creaked open, revealing a man in his late 50s. His face was weathered, his eyes sharp and suspicious. "What are you doing out here?" he demanded, his voice gruff. I babbled incoherently, trying to explain what had happened. He stepped aside, allowing me to enter. The cabin was small but warm, a fire crackling in the hearth. I collapsed into a chair, my body trembling with exhaustion and fear. "You said someone was following you?" the man asked, handing me a towel. I nodded, my hands shaking as I wiped my face. "Yes, in the woods. I don't know who or what, but they're out there." He frowned, his gaze drifting to the window. "You shouldn't be out here. These woods aren't safe." "The Blackwood Butcher?" I asked, forcing a weak smile, hoping he'd laugh and tell me it was just a myth. But he didn't. "Something like that," he muttered, grabbing a rifle from the wall. "Stay here. Lock the door behind me." "Wait, where are you going?" I asked, panic rising in my chest. "If someone's out there, I'll find them," he said, stepping outside before I could protest. I locked the door as instructed, my heart pounding. The minutes dragged on, the silence inside the cabin almost unbearable. I jumped at every sound, every creak of the wooden floorboards, every gust of wind against the windows. Then, without warning, the lights went out, plunging the cabin into darkness. I fumbled for my phone, using its weak glow to navigate. That's when I heard it, the unmistakable sound of footsteps inside the cabin. My breath caught in my throat. "Hello," I whispered, clutching my phone like a lifeline. No response. The footsteps grew louder, closer. I backed into a corner, my mind racing. The man had locked the door behind him. Whoever was in the cabin now hadn't come through the front door. A shadow moved in the dim light of my phone. Tall, broad-shouldered, and unmistakably human. I held my breath, praying they wouldn't see me, but they did. The figure turned, and for a brief moment, the light of my phone illuminated his face. It wasn't the man from the cabin. It was someone else entirely, his face gaunt, his eyes empty and unfeeling. I ran. I didn't think, didn't plan. I just bolted for the door, unlocking it and throwing it open without looking back. The storm greeted me like an old friend, the rain soaking me instantly. I didn't stop running, even as the figure's heavy footsteps followed. My lungs burned, my legs ached, but adrenaline kept me moving. Eventually, I saw headlights in the distance. A car, parked on a dirt road. I screamed for help, waving my arms frantically. The driver, a middle-aged woman, rolled down her window, her expression one of concern and alarm. "Are you okay?" she asked. "Someone's chasing me," I gasped, collapsing beside her car. She didn't ask questions. She helped me into the passenger seat and sped off, leaving the woods and my pursuer behind. I told her everything as she drove, my words tumbling out in a frantic stream. She took me to the nearest police station, where I filed a report. The man from the cabin was never found. Neither was the figure who'd chased me. The police searched the area but came up empty-handed. No footprints, no signs of a struggle. Just the empty cabin and the storm-soaked woods. To this day, I don't know who or what I encountered in Blackwood Hill. Some nights, I convinced myself it was just my imagination, the product of fear and isolation. But deep down, I know the truth. There was someone out there, and they were hunting me. The rain started as a whisper, faint drops tapping against my windshield as I parked at the edge of Blackwood Hill. By the time I had made my way into the woods, it had turned into a relentless downpour, the kind that seeped into your bones and made you question every decision that led you there. My flashlight cut through the sheets of rain and shadowed trees, but it did little to settle the growing unease in my chest. I wasn't supposed to be there, not really. A rational part of me had screamed to stay away, but that night, curiosity, or maybe a dare, had led me here, to this infamous forest known for its grim stories of the Blackwood Butcher. According to the lore, a man had murdered countless hikers decades ago. Their bodies never found, their screams swallowed by the forest. Officially, they called it an unsolved mystery. Unofficially, the locals swore the butcher never left. It wasn't belief in the stories that brought me here, though. It was pride. It started as an office bet, the kind of thing you laugh about over bad coffee. You couldn't survive a night in Blackwood Hill, they teased, passing around grainy photos of the forest online. I had laughed too, eager to prove them wrong. After all, it was just a forest. Ghosts weren't real, and serial killers didn't lurk in the woods for decades. Or so I thought. By the time I pitched my tent near a clearing, the rain was already making everything miserable. I huddled inside, listening to the relentless patter on the fabric above. Hours passed, the storm refusing to let up. My phone had no signal, and the snacks I'd packed did little to distract me. Every rustle of leaves outside seemed amplified in the dark, each one sending a spike of adrenaline through my veins. Around midnight, I decided to step out for some fresh air. Sitting alone in a tent for hours, drenched in paranoia, had started to drive me crazy. With my flashlight in hand, I ventured a little way from the tent, the mud sucking at my boots as I walked. The rain blurred my vision, but it was then, just beyond the edges of my flashlight's beam, that I saw it, a figure. At first, I thought it was a trick of the rain and shadows, but as I strained my eyes, the figure moved. Slowly, deliberately, a chill ran down my spine. "Hello," I called out, my voice barely audible over the storm. No response. The figure was gone, swallowed by the forest. My heart raced as I turned back toward the tent, suddenly desperate for the illusion of safety it offered. But as I walked, the path felt different, unfamiliar. Had I wandered farther than I thought? I shone the flashlight around, but the rain made it hard to see more than a few feet ahead. That's when I heard it, footsteps, heavy and deliberate, splashing in the mud behind me. I spun around, the flashlight shaking in my hand. "Who's there?" I shouted, my voice cracking. Silence. The footsteps stopped. My instincts screamed at me to run. But where? Deeper into the woods? Back to my tent? I couldn't be sure I'd even find it again. Panic overtook reason. I ran blindly, the flashlight bouncing wildly in my grasp. The footsteps resumed, matching my pace. Whoever or whatever it was, they were following me. Branches clawed at my face and arms as I stumbled through the undergrowth. I tried to stay quiet, to listen, but my breathing was loud, erratic. Each time I slowed, the footsteps seemed to grow closer. Then, through the haze of rain and fear, I saw it. A cabin. Its windows glowed faintly, a beacon in the endless dark. I sprinted toward it, ignoring the pain as I slipped and fell on the slick ground. Reaching the door, I pounded on it with all my strength. "Help! Please!" After a long moment, the door creaked open, revealing a man in his late 50s. His face was lined with age and weariness, his eyes sharp and cautious. "What are you doing out here?" he asked, his voice gruff. I stumbled inside, barely able to form coherent words. "Someone's following me," I gasped. "Out in the woods." The man frowned, his gaze flicking to the rain-soaked trees outside. "You shouldn't be out here. Not alone." I nodded, too shaken to argue. He gestured for me to sit by the fire, and I collapsed into a chair, the warmth barely registering against the chill in my body. He handed me a towel, his expression unreadable as I tried to explain what had happened. "You said you saw someone?" he asked, his voice low. I nodded, gripping the towel like a lifeline. "Yes, in the woods. I don't know who, but they were following me." The man sighed, standing and grabbing a rifle from the wall. "Stay here," he said. "Lock the door behind me." "Wait," I protested, panic rising again. "You can't just..." But he was already gone, stepping out into the storm before I could finish. I locked the door as he instructed, my hands trembling. The minutes dragged on, the silence inside the cabin almost unbearable. Then, without warning, the power went out, plunging the cabin into darkness. My phone's flashlight became my only source of light. I moved cautiously through the small space, every creak of the floorboards making my heart pound. And then I heard footsteps, inside the cabin. My breath caught in my throat. "Hello," I whispered, clutching my phone tightly. The footsteps grew louder, closer. I backed into a corner, my pulse roaring in my ears. Then I saw him, a tall figure, his face gaunt and pale, his eyes cold and empty. It wasn't the man from the cabin. It was someone else entirely. He moved toward me, slow and deliberate. Desperation overtook fear, and I bolted for the door, fumbling with the lock as he closed the distance. The storm greeted me like a lifeline, the rain washing over me as I ran. I didn't look back. I didn't stop. The woods blurred around me as I sprinted, every shadow a potential threat. When I finally saw headlights in the distance, I screamed for help, waving my arms frantically. The car stopped, and the driver, a middle-aged woman, rolled down her window. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice filled with concern. "Please, just go," I cried, collapsing into the passenger seat. She didn't ask questions, only drove. I told her everything as we sped away, my words tumbling out in a frantic stream. She took me to the nearest police station, where I filed a report. The cabin was found, but it was empty. The man who had let me in was never identified. Neither was the figure who had chased me. The police found no footprints, no signs of anyone else in the woods, just an empty cabin and endless trees. To this day, I don't know who or what I encountered that night, but some nights, when I close my eyes, I see that figure again, his empty eyes staring back at me, and I know deep down that he's still out there, waiting. The road stretched ahead, shrouded in mist as the rain intensified, pounding against my car's roof like a relentless drumbeat. I hesitated, staring into the darkness beyond my headlights. Black Hollow Forest wasn't a place you visited willingly. Yet there I was, parked at its edge, questioning the choices that led me there. They called it a cursed place, not for ghosts or monsters, but for the human predator who once prowled its depths. Decades ago, a man known as the Black Hollow Stalker had turned this forest into his hunting ground. Stories of campers disappearing, their remains never recovered, still sent shivers through the small town nearby. Official investigations yielded nothing but whispers of an unervingly clever killer who vanished as mysteriously as he appeared. So why was I there? Started as a challenge, a foolish one at that. My friends, emboldened by beer and bravado, had dared me to spend one night alone in the infamous forest. "Come on, Ben," they teased. "You're the skeptic. Prove us wrong." No one's been attacked there in years. Couldn't back down. My pride wouldn't let me. Besides, the stalker was either dead or long gone, I reasoned. And with a flashlight, a GPS watch, and a tent, I figured I could handle anything nature threw at me. But as I stepped out of the car and into the cold embrace of the forest, doubt clawed at my confidence. The trees loomed overhead, their skeletal branches clawing at the sky. The rain was relentless, soaking through my jacket and turning the dirt path into a slippery mess. My flashlight's beam barely pierced the gloom, and every rustle of leaves felt amplified in the oppressive silence. I trudged deeper, following a faint trail marked on my map, until I found a small clearing. Setting up the tent was a struggle in the downpour, my fingers numb and clumsy. By the time I finished, I was drenched and exhausted. I crawled inside, lighting a small lantern and wrapping myself in a damp blanket. The wind howled outside, shaking the tent, but I told myself it was just a storm, just nature, nothing more. Hours passed. The rain showed no sign of letting up, and the small noises outside began to gnaw at my nerves. Every crack of a branch, every shift of the wind, felt deliberate. I tried to distract myself with my phone, but there was no signal. The battery drained quickly as I played offline games, and soon I was left alone with my thoughts and the storm. Then I heard it. Footsteps, faint but deliberate, crunching through the wet undergrowth. My breath caught in my throat. I turned off the lantern, plunging the tent into darkness. Straining to hear over the pounding rain, I waited. The footsteps stopped, replaced by silence so deep it was suffocating. "Hello," I called out, my voice trembling. "Is someone there?" No answer, just the rain. For a moment I thought I might have imagined it, but then a shadow passed by the tent. My heart pounded, each beat louder than the last. Whoever it was didn't speak, didn't knock, just lingered outside. I fumbled for my flashlight, gripping it tightly as if it could protect me. Slowly, I unzipped the tent and shone the beam into the darkness. The rain distorted everything, turning the forest into a blur of movement and shadow. But there, just at the edge of the clearing, I saw him, a man. He stood motionless, watching me. His face was obscured by a hood, but his posture was unervingly calm. My voice failed me as I stared, frozen in place. Then, as if deciding I wasn't worth his time, he turned and walked into the woods. I didn't wait to find out if he'd return. Scrambling out of the tent, I grabbed my backpack and flashlight, abandoning the rest of my gear. I needed to get back to my car. The forest seemed alien now, each tree a potential hiding place for the figure I'd seen. The rain masked the sound of my footsteps, but it also muffled everything around me. I couldn't tell if I was alone or being followed. Every so often, I'd catch glimpses of movement, shadows darting between the trees. My pulse raced as I pushed through the underbrush, my flashlight shaking in my hand. I was hopelessly lost, the GPS watch useless without a clear signal. Panic clawed at me as I stumbled through the darkness, branches snagging my clothes and skin. Then, through the haze of rain, I saw it. A cabin. Its windows glowed faintly, a promise of safety in the endless dark. I ran toward it, slipping and falling in the mud, desperation driving me forward. Reaching the door, I pounded on it with all my strength. "Help! Please!" The door opened slowly, revealing an older man, his face lined with years of hardship. His sharp eyes scanned me, taking in my soaked and disheveled appearance. "What's going on?" he asked, his voice wary. "Someone's out there," I gasped. He was watching me, following me. The man frowned but stepped aside, motioning for me to enter. I collapsed into a chair by the fire, the warmth barely registering as I tried to explain. He listened silently, his expression unreadable. "You're not the first," he said finally, his voice low. "People come out here thinking the stories are just that, stories. But some of us know better." He stood, grabbing a rifle from the wall. "Stay here. Lock the door behind me." "Wait," I protested, panic flaring anew. "You can't just..." But he was already gone, stepping out into the storm before I could finish. I locked the door as instructed, my hands trembling. Minutes stretched into an eternity. The fire crackled softly, a fragile barrier against the encroaching dark. Then the lights went out. I froze, the sudden darkness pressing down on me. My phone's flashlight cast weak beams as I moved cautiously through the cabin. Every creak of the floorboards set my nerves on edge. And then I heard it, footsteps, inside the cabin. "Who's there?" I whispered, clutching my phone tightly. No answer. The footsteps grew louder, deliberate. I backed into a corner, my pulse thundering in my ears. Then I saw him, the man from the woods. He stood in the doorway, his face now visible in the faint light. His expression was blank, emotionless, but his eyes burned with a cold intensity. He moved closer, and I bolted, crashing through the back door into the storm. I ran blindly, the rain obscuring everything. The forest closed in around me, every shadow a threat. I didn't know where I was going, only that I needed to get away. Headlights appeared in the distance, a beacon of salvation. I stumbled onto the road, waving my arms frantically. The car screeched to a halt, and the driver, a woman in her 40s, rolled down her window. "Are you hurt?" she asked, concern etched on her face. "Please, just drive," I begged, climbing into the passenger seat. She didn't ask questions, only sped away from the forest. At the nearest police station, I recounted everything, my words tumbling out in a frantic stream. Officers searched the cabin and surrounding woods but found nothing. No footprints, no sign of the man. The official report labeled it a case of paranoia, fueled by the forest's dark reputation. But I know what I saw, and sometimes, in the dead of night, I feel those eyes on me again, watching from the shadows, waiting.
Hey everyone, thank you so much for supporting this channel. It truly means a lot. As a broke college student editing all my videos on an Android phone, it takes a lot of effort to bring these stories to life. A laptop would help me create better content faster, so if you enjoy my work, please subscribe and share. Your support makes all the difference. Thank you so much.